Alrighty. So let me just go over today's little business stuff, and then I will entertain any and all questions that you might have. So I want to start out talking about next week. So your assignment for next week, and it is up there in an assignment folder, but the dates are all scrambled up right now because it's old dates. But the assignment is to read a reading called Sapiens, right? And the reading response assignment focuses in on certain pages. It's a fairly it's a excerpt from a full book, nonfiction book. Obviously, you're not reading the whole book, but the excerpt that I've given you is pretty long. And when you look at the questions, you'll see that I'm asking you to focus in on certain sections, certain chapters, whatever. So it's not quite as much as the full length of the thing. Number one. Number two, it's always really important to, before you read, to actually read the reading response questions, to just get an idea of the kinds of things I'm asking you to think about, so that when you start reading, you're kind of predisposed to be focusing on those things. One thing we're going to spend a little time talking about today is strategies of reading. And one of the most important things about reading, and it takes a lot of practice over really kind of your lifetime. It's not something you just learn in one semester, but you can certainly get the basic idea, is that the more you're able to anticipate what you're going to read about, the better you're going to be able to digest the meaning, because you're going to be looking for certain things and not other things. Like, I'll give you a simple example. When you read fiction, you understand that you're reading a story, and that the story is in some sense make-believe, and it's not intended to be real, and that the facts you learn in that story are not supposed to correlate perfectly with reality. Whereas, and since you go to a novel or a short story, you have those expectations in mind. Just as when you pick up the New York Times or the New York Post or whatever you read, a newspaper, you expect those facts to be true, in the sense that they are referring to things in the world that are happening, have happened, do exist, so on and so forth, rather than make-believe, fiction versus nonfiction. Okay, so reading the reading response questions in advance allows you to kind of have a framework of what to expect in the text and what you should be looking for as you read. We'll talk about like reading with a purpose. Reading with some assumptions about what you expect to find. So let me just give one little other note about Sapiens. So Sapiens really deals with, you would just call it an evolutionary or a biological perspective on friendship or human relationships in general, right? Because of our biological nature as human beings, we are capable of then carrying on special types of relationships that other animals cannot have, right? Other animals have emotions, other animals have families, other animals have certain versions of society, right? So they obviously have relationships. Dogs have relationships with each other. Cats have, well, not so much, but in theory, cats have relationships with each other, just not with you, the owner. They just go off and do their own thing. But in light of our human nature, in light of our biology, we are able to carry on a very special type of relationship with other human beings because of what evolution has made possible. And what evolution makes possible for us is the power of speech and the power of thinking in general, and thinking in a certain way that other animals cannot think. And those two features of our biology, or the features that our biology makes possible, just utterly transform the types of relationships we as humans are able to have compared to other animals. And in some ways, it sounds really basic and obvious, but at this early stage in the semester, it's really crucial to see these vast differences between us and other animals. What did I want to say? I'm totally blanking on what I wanted to add to that, but yeah, I can't remember. Well, maybe I'll come back to it and remember. Um, Let me just one note. Aristotle, when we get to Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, one of the books I've asked you to buy, he has his concept of friendship, or in Greek, it's philia. And philia actually means love, but it can also mean friendship. And it's where you get like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, or, like Francophile, it's like a love of French culture, so on. And so bibliophile, someone who loves books. Anyway, for him, friendship is a phenomenon that really can only happen between human beings because it has special characteristics that are based on our distinct nature as human beings, as different from other animals. If you want to know how we're different from other animals, I know nobody probably rides horses in this class, but maybe you do. The difference between us and other animals is we ride the horse and the horse does not ride us, right? They're just kind of some striking differences. Okay, so next week we'll meet at 7:30, and eventually, probably the end of next week, you will take quiz 1. So I will get a date for quiz 1 tomorrow. I will have it posted on Blackboard, and I also send it out by email, right? And so let me just explain what quiz 1 is. So today we're going to cover quiz 1 vocabulary. So part of what quiz 1 is it deals with vocabulary that has to do with reading and interpretation, right? What we're going to do in going over that vocabulary today is then to apply it to mending wall and the money. Mending wall and the money. So your quiz is actually going to be multiple choice questions. It's all going to be through Blackboard. It'll be really simple. Once you complete it, you'll get your answers, or you'll get your grade, and I think you'll be able to see which ones you got wrong, if you actually got any wrong. It's a pretty easy quiz. But basically, it's not just about knowing the meanings of the vocabulary terms, but being able to apply them to a text. Being able to apply them to a text. So let me say one more thing, and then if we have questions, people will ask. So today, we've got these 2 readings. We've got Mending Wall and the Money. And these 2 stories, such as they are, they're actually little short stories. Mending Wall is actually a poem, but you also notice that it's a narrative. It's a story about these 2 dudes with this wall and all that. And obviously, these 2 little stories have a lot to do with human relationships, have to do with friendships. So we're applying the vocabulary terms to the 2 stories for the quiz. Destiny, correct, 100%. So our focus today is going to be a little less on friendship and a little more on skills of reading and interpretation. Because I said at the outset, and it's in the syllabus and stuff like that, there are kind of 2 central goals of this course. One is to establish this framework of friendship or frenemies, and central themes, central topics, central issues that arise in human relationships generally, right? But then the other part is just being a liberal arts class. It's part of just developing your skills of reading and interpretation. And these skills of reading and interpretation are beneficial regardless of what type of class you're taking or what type of text you're reading, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's a textbook, whether it's a novel, whether it's a tweet on Twitter, or, if Twitter's around in a couple of years, maybe Twitter by then will be gone. Maybe Facebook will be gone. We'll all be living in the metaverse. So today, we're going to talk about issues of reading and interpretation that will kind of segue into a discussion of these vocabulary terms. And then we're going to read Mending Wall and the Money and discuss those 2 readings in light of those vocabulary terms, right? So basically what we're going to do is really prep for the quiz. And once we go through this, you're going to see that the quiz is really pretty simple, right? And a lot of the vocabulary words, many of them you're going to be already pretty familiar with. Some are going to be new, some are going to be unusual. And these vocabulary terms are just, they are a basic set of terms that one uses to talk about a text, or particularly to talk about a story. Okay, so before we jump into anything else, can we retake it if you don't like a grade? No, right? The midterm and the final will be, you can give me a draft before you turn in the final product, and I can give you feedback. Kenya, you shouldn't be worried already. You shouldn't be worried about getting a bad grade. So let me say one more thing. I'm talking too much. So one thing I've discovered doing Zoom classes, or doing class on Zoom, is that the chat function is like a really great, number one, it's a great way for you guys to just provide feedback without like overly kind of disrupting the flow of class. I mean, obviously, sometimes I'm going to ask you to talk in person and not just do a chat. But the one thing I really like about chat is it allows you guys an opportunity to regularly have feedback within the flow of the class. And it also allows me to see where your heads are at. One of the biggest challenges of being a teacher is that it's not enough to just explain things. You need to know that the people you're talking to, the students you're talking to, actually understand what the hell you're talking about. And the only way you can figure that out is to talk to them, to ask them questions, and also to just kind of read the room and see where people are at. So the chat is a really great place for you guys. Like if I said something that doesn't make sense, if I said something you want me to repeat, if you want clarification, if you have a question. So I want you to really, I guess what I'm saying is I want you to really feel free to use the chat, you know, as much as you want, really. If everybody really writes a lot of stuff, then I might have an issue of like scrolling, just little things like that. But otherwise, I found, I don't know your own experience, but I've found as a professor that students using the chat in that way is really helpful for both sides. It's helpful for me and helpful for the students. But there will be definitely, you know, when we get into discussion and I ask questions, I'm going to want to hear people speak with their voice, not just type into a box. So with that, anybody have important business questions about the class or anything like that? So Daniel has a question about the quiz. The quiz, I'm going to give you a window of time to complete it, like a number of days. Like you'll have a cushion, right? And the thing will be is once you start the quiz, you have to finish it within an hour. So I'm going to set it, and that's going to be way more time than you're going to need. Trust me. This quiz is going to go by pretty quickly. This quiz is like the first major grade in the class, but it's not a super big grade. So there's not like a super amount of pressure on this quiz. I mean, which you should do well. And so you'll have a time period of a few days to complete it. And the point is, once you actually click the button to start the quiz, you have to complete it within an hour. And you should be able to go back and check your answers, right? I've set it up so like you don't have to turn it in until you turn it in, right? And once you do an answer, it doesn't like prevent you from going back to it and changing it. Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question.
Go for it, Destiny.
Okay, so I actually have two questions. So, one, are we only doing Wednesday? Are we only doing Zoom on Wednesdays?
That's correct.
Okay. And my second question, so like for the structure of class, basically for the assignments, every week would be everything that's listed in there, right?
Okay, so good question. We'll get to Louise's question in a second. So first of all, in terms of, you know, what is your weekly assignment? The center of your weekly assignment is to read and answer the questions. Then along with that, I've provided you PowerPoints and I've provided you video lectures to support and provide detail for things we can't cover in class time, right? So ideally, we're going to have a little lecture today, and every class will have a little lecture at the beginning, but we don't want to use our class time here for me to be lecturing all the time. We're gonna focus on the themes of the text. We're gonna focus on answering the questions of the reading response, and we're gonna read the text. We're gonna read the money. We're gonna read Mending Wall, and then we're gonna just say what's going on here. What is the author saying? What is the relationship between these characters, and so on.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So the primary thing is reading and answering the questions, but then I've given you supporting materials with videos that you should be watching. You watch at your own pace. So next week's assignment, Sapiens, if you're coming to class, I'd like you to have it read, and at the very least read when you come to class. Ideally with the questions answered as well, but you're still going to have until Sunday every week to finish the assignment. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
Yes.
since we're meeting, our meeting is almost, I don't want to say it's worthless, but if you haven't done the reading and looked at the questions, our meeting's not going to be valuable, because you need to have some familiarity with the text already for us to talk about it in the way that we're going to talk about it. Who's got their hand up right now? Is that Luis? Okay.
No, you answered my question already.
Okay.
Another thing is, how long is the class?
All right.
What's
So we're
that?
going to start at 7:30. Honestly, I haven't given a definitive amount because I know people's schedules are different. I mean, I would say, around an hour and a half, maybe sometimes less, but something in that ballpark. We're only meeting once a week. And I mean, a typical 2 day a week class meets for, like an hour and 25 minutes or something like
An
that.
hour 15.
Hour and 15. Yeah. So we'll go a little more than that, but our goal is to hit the information we need to hit and then be done with it. So we finish early. So the recordings. All right. So we're like in week 2 right now, right? So the recording will be in the week 2 folder, and it will just be at the bottom. Like you've got the module with all the description, and then there's all the resource materials at the bottom in the folder. So it's just going to be in there, and it will always be in the week that we had the class. Yep.
Professor, the Zoom link is not in the permanent tab that you say it will be. At least for me, it's not.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's one class where I didn't put the tab in there properly. So that's still something I have to get to. And I'm aware of that, but thank you for reminding me. Do you think you could just send me a little email saying, please fix the Zoom link?
I will.
Okay, that kind of thing is really helpful right now because my brain is a little scattered. Okay, I think we should get going here because otherwise we'll be here all night. But if people think of questions, maybe I can answer them at the end of class at this point. Okay, so first thing, these are your vocabulary terms. Go in about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, we're going to get to these terms, and then we're going to apply them to the 2 texts, and I'll put them up and we'll read them. Some of these words are going to be really familiar to you, like characters, conflict, setting, narrator, plot. And then some of the words are going to be a little more elusive, like maybe you've never heard, like the concept of a trope, or logos and mythos, diegesis and mimesis, these Greek words that are kind of terms of literary criticism and analysis. Daniel.
I was just gonna ask, is this PowerPoint up on Blackboard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a version of it is up. And I think it's just called Vocabulary for Quiz 1.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Okay. So part of this course is about learning how to read and interpret. And we're going to get in the weeds a little bit here for a few minutes about what you're actually doing when you're reading and interpreting. And some of the things I'm going to say are like, what is it? Expedia.com, the commercials with Captain Obvious. Like some of this stuff is really basic and obvious, but until you kind of recognize the obvious and the basic, the full implications of what you're doing is not totally clear. And it's important to really be aware of what you're doing when you're reading, because reading is something that requires active thinking or active cogitation. When you watch TV or you listen to the radio, your mind can be really passive and just kind of receive. It's just like a receptacle. But when you read, if you really want to get the meaning out of what you're reading, you have to extract the meaning from the text. You have to, it's a little bit strong word, assault the text. You have to grapple with the text. You have to do something active rather than passive. And that means the wheels in your head have to be turning. And that's labor, that's work. It's a type of work that's not always totally pleasant. You know, so some of the readings we're going to have this semester are going to be pretty challenging. Thomas Hobbes, for example, is writing in the 17th century, and he speaks in 17th century English. It's not totally different from ours, but there's some important differences. We're going to be reading Aristotle in English, thank goodness, but he's for various reasons challenging to read, and so our brains are going to be exercised. And my general impression with students is your muscle in your brain for reading is not in the best shape it could be. And some of what we're going to be doing is like getting on the treadmill, and it just like your legs hurt and you start sucking wind. It's kind of the same thing when you read a challenging text. You feel like, wow, this really hurts my brain. Okay, so let me ask this. Interpretation. I have a definition somewhere in here of interpretation. What does it mean to interpret a text? I mean, you can interpret just about anything. You can interpret someone's body language. You can interpret a foreign language. What does it mean to interpret a text?
It's like how you come up with the, like, what do you think? How do you
Okay.
perceive something?
Yeah, it has something to do with the perception about how you understand the meaning of what's being said, right? Well, isn't it, let me ask this, isn't it obvious what's being said? Or is it not obvious what's being said?
Well, it depends on what you're reading.
Okay, good, right? So we're reading kind of, you could call it like great works of literature. And great works of literature for a variety of reasons, some of which we'll discuss. It's not always clear what the author is really trying to communicate, which means that the words the author uses don't fully capture exactly what the author means. It's like there's something behind the words that the words point to, right? Everybody's familiar with the concept of reading between the lines. Everybody's heard that expression.
Yes.
Good. On a text, you know, like a page with words on it in lines, you read left to right. What's in between the lines? Literally?
Nothing.
Nothing. Thank you. That's the answer we're looking for. Nothing. So what does it mean when you say, I'm going to read between the lines, given that there's literally nothing there?
Does it mean that you have space to make up your own, I guess, theory of what the
Okay.
person's trying to say?
All right. So let me say this. I think we all, and there's a lot of reasons why we have it, especially with like modern art, modern poetry, novels, modern paintings, we have a strong conception that the meaning of something is just the meaning for us, and that it's subjective, and that it's just the product of our point of view. Now, your point of view on a story, drawing on your experiences, your understanding, that is all really important information or data in making sense of what you read. On the other hand, we're all looking at the same text, right? Let me, I don't know, right? Here's a book. It's got words on the page. We can't change what those words are. We can't change the order that they're in. We can't change the choices the author has made about the words they've used and how they've used them. And so interpretation, you could say, is both objective and does have a subjective element, right? If I say to you all, I'm in a good mood, and someone says, well, professor, I'm going to interpret what you're saying, and I think you're really in a bad mood. Well, if you're going to contradict what I'm superficially saying, you're going to have a really good explanation as to why that is the case, right? And maybe it's because when I said I'm in a good mood, I actually have a frown on my face or something. Maybe I really don't look like I'm in a good mood, but just that's the words that are coming out. So what you're doing is comparing my words to my body language, and you're reading between the lines. And the truth is, maybe what I said is not exactly simply the case, right? So interpretation actually has a very strong, like, non-subjective or objective element. The text is evidence. The text is a series of clues that point you in the direction of the meaning. And we can't just make that text mean whatever it wants. It can only really mean certain things. I'll give you an example. The title of Robert Frost's poem is Mending Wall. It's not something else. It's not whatever we make up. It's Mending Wall. So in many cases, there are a lot of fundamental meanings in any text that are really just objectively the case. There are things between the lines. There are things that an author wants to suggest to us, or intimate to us, or insinuate to us. They kind of elbow us in the side and give us a nudge and say, this is what I'm trying to say, but I'm not coming out and completely saying it, right? So there is an important role for bringing our own experiences. And because our own experiences, each of us has different experiences, we're going to understand the words that we're reading in black and white on the page. We're going to have different shades of understanding of those words, because we understand those words actually slightly differently in light of our different experiences. On the other hand, we're all human beings. We're all born, we grow up, we eat, we go to sleep. Most of us go on to reproduce. Actually, our lives are very similar in so many ways that the broad meanings of things are very consistent, in fact. And of course, if meanings of words were not consistent when we exchange them with each other, we wouldn't be able to communicate with one another. We would just be talking past each other, or we'd just be talking to ourselves. We wouldn't really be talking to each other. So there's a huge component of interpretation that is really objective. And we're going to touch on both. So I'll give you an example right now. The title of Robert Frost's poem is Mending Wall. It's a very unusual title. The title is not Mending the Wall. The title is Mending Wall, right? And there's some very specific things going on with Robert Frost's kind of manipulation of those words, because we'll get to it. So interpreting is understanding the meaning of what's said, because what's said is not everything that is intended, or what's said is not everything that is meant. There's something a little bit beyond just what is said that the text points to. And we need to interpret because the meaning of a text does not hit you over the head. It's not obvious at first, and it becomes a kind of work. And when we look at the process of reading, we'll see how there's a difference between simply reading versus understanding what's being read. They're connected, but they're slightly different. One of the problems we have in understanding any text, any challenging text, is that its meaning is not self-evident. It's not transparent. And number two, one of the big problems is we are arrogant very often about thinking we know what we're reading when in fact we don't, right? We read it and go, oh yeah, this is what it's about. I got it. Never mind. And in fact, you gloss over it, you read it quickly, you scan it, and you fit it into a kind of paradigm that you understand, but it turns out maybe that's not exactly what's being said. That happens all the time in conversation. Like you hear somebody say something and you kind of fit it into your vision of what you think they're saying. And it turns out maybe you're like not right because you're not really listening as carefully as you might be. Okay, so one of the big things in reading is to not be arrogant that you think you know what exactly it is what you're reading, to be skeptical about your own understanding of what you're reading. And I say be Socratic. So to be Socratic is to be like Socrates. And Socrates is a famous Greek philosopher, thinker, moral thinker, moral philosopher. And he says, the only thing that I know is that I don't know. So know that you do not know. He said, the only thing I have knowledge of is my own ignorance. So question, this is really important. When Socrates says, the only thing that I know is that I don't know, I hate to be confusing here. Does he know anything? Or is he just like saying kind of tricky sayings? What does he actually know when he says, the only thing I know is that I don't know?
I think
Go,
he-
go for it.
okay. I think he's just saying that he's aware that he doesn't know everything.
Yeah, very good. So Melanie says he's aware his knowledge is incomplete. So that's really good.
He don't know everything that is being said or something.
Let's put it this way. Is there anyone who has complete knowledge? Any human being?
No, nah,
No.
Not really.
Let's leave it at that. For the Greeks, the only type of being that had complete knowledge they understood as a god. And by definition, a human being is a mere mortal. And that meant by definition, they had incomplete understanding, incomplete knowledge, right? The difference is nobody, no human being has complete knowledge, but not every human being recognizes that. Socrates is this strange character who recognizes his own ignorance, and it's crucial. So the point is, we all know human beings, and of course we're all guilty of it, of thinking we know what we're frickin' talking about when we actually don't, right? So we're ignorant, but we're not aware, or we're not conscious, or we're not cognizant of our own ignorance. Now, the big thing is, why is that a problem? To be conscious of your own ignorance is not to be an ignorant person. It's actually the opposite. It's the person who's not aware of their own ignorance who's actually the ignorant person. The person who is aware that they don't know something, that understanding allows them to continue to pursue the truth and figure it out, or at least figure it out much better. The person who thinks they know what they're talking about and doesn't, they've created like a barrier where they're not going to try to understand anymore, because what is there to understand? They already understand everything, right? I'll give you one little example, and we'll start speeding it up here a little bit. But obviously, this stuff about being aware of your own ignorance applies not just to reading, but to every aspect of your life and everything you could ever conceive of. And I think as a human being, Socrates was considered wise precisely because he was willing to recognize that there were things he didn't know and understand. And of course, willingness to admit one's ignorance, there's a huge like emotional component to it. It's not just like, yeah, I know or I don't know. People don't like to admit they don't know shit, right? Everybody likes to go around acting like they know stuff, you know, especially professors. They're the worst. Anyway, actually in the book Sapiens, which you're going to read a section of next week, there's a great story he tells that one of the things that separated out Western culture from other cultures was its conception of the unknown. It's a conception of the unknown. In the medieval period, throughout the entire world, virtually every culture believed it had like a complete understanding of the world. And of course, none of them did. None of them had a complete understanding. And the author of Sapiens tells a really cool story about how the Chinese, which they've always been a very sophisticated, very advanced civilization for thousands of years, today included in a manner of speech, because they're like communist totalitarians. It's not, to me, that's not my vision of progress. But anyway, the Chinese had invented like the first seafaring ships, right? I mean, today we have planes and cargo ships and all this, you know, Elon Musk to the moon and stuff like that. But in those days, like, you didn't travel very far. And if you did it by land. And seafaring vessels, like ships that were big enough to actually survive on the open seas, like the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian Ocean, all these things. That was a big deal because people could travel in ways that human beings never could. And it meant they could go places they had never been. So the Chinese built all these large scale ships, seafaring ships. And the problem is they didn't know what to do with them because they believed that they had mapped out the entire known world. There was nothing else to know. The big difference with the West is that when they slightly later started to build ships like that could go out on the oceans, they developed a concept that there was an unknown to be discovered, that there were places that they had not mapped out on the globe. And the reason they discovered those places is precisely because they assumed they're things that they didn't know to begin with. Right. And it's like a really great lesson. It just happened to be Western civilization. You know, it could have been anybody. Doesn't really matter about who did it. But the point is, it's precisely when you recognize your own ignorance that you have the possibility of discovering the thing you're ignorant about. Right. And it's just as true with relationships, with history, with writing. We're going to look, for example, when we get to Aristotle, he's going to talk about the relationship between love and knowledge of another human being, and that love of another human being allows you to get to know them, like really get to know them, because you put up with all their stupid shit, right? And the other thing is you can't really love someone until you actually know them, because you say, oh, I love so-and-so. Oh, they're so amazing. I just love them. Well, when you say you love them or you're best friends with them, well, the question is, who is them? Because if you don't know them, you don't really love them. You have some image of them that you're in love with, not like the reality. And of course, they have like infinite depth in some ways. Like, you never get to completely know another person. There's always mystery lurking there, which makes for attraction and also, you know, repulsion. It works both ways. Okay, so ignorance. Let's keep going here. So the meaning of a text will never hit you over the head because there's a gap between the words on the page and the thought behind them. So one basic way of thinking about what interpretation is that you're trying to find the meaning behind the words you're reading. And it's almost like you're trying to translate that text into your own language. And well, you're trying to read between the lines. I'm going to skip some of the other things on here. I'm going to skip this for now because we can talk about this in relationship to the titles in a moment. But here's a really important distinction. When you think about words and how they mean, this is the only class where we're going to think in these terms about issues of interpretation and kind of get in the weeds here. So I don't want to lose anybody here, but really important. There's two ways to conceive of the meaning of a word. There's the lexical meaning and there's the contextual meaning, or you could call it the denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. Does anyone understand the distinction between these two, between the lexical and the connotative meaning of a word? It's a really important distinction that as a college student and as a reader, like you're all going to go off and be professionals, you should understand this distinction. What is the lexical meaning of a word? Anybody know? I mean, I do have it up there.
It's basically what the books define the word as.
Yeah, exactly. A lexicon is basically just a dictionary, right?
Oh,
So a lexical meaning is just a dictionary meaning of a term.
could I say it's a definition of the author?
That's tricky because authors don't normally give definitions of their terms, especially in things like stories and poetry.
Okay.
They might, if you're reading like a philosophical treatise, Aristotle, Kant, Plato, they might give an explicit definition of how they're using that word in that context, right? But let's keep it really simple. A lexical meaning is just the dictionary definition that we're all familiar with, right? So mending wall, right? Let's keep it. So the title of Mending Wall is really fascinating. And we'll kind of, our goal is going to be in part to unfold the meaning of that title. What's the dictionary? Stupid question, Captain Obvious. What's the dictionary definition of a wall? What is it? What is a wall?
As you can say, a barrier.
Yeah, it's some kind of barrier. What else does it do beside form a barrier? What other things do walls do, or what are they?
They
Separate something.
Okay, good. So you guys are, it's like normally it's a physical structure, some kind of boundary that's a barrier that separates things. They can enclose things, they can divide things. Very good, right? And all those elements are going to be really important in making sense of the meaning of this poem and the title. Now let's so that's pretty much what a wall is. Like I'm sure the dictionary might have something a little extra to say, but whatever. Mending. What does it mean to mend something?
To put something back together.
Okay, good. To put something back together. We might even say to fix something, right? But let's just clarify here. Mending is a certain type of fixing. It's not any type of fixing. When you think of mending, what specific way of fixing do you think about? What act to repair? That also means to, okay, so what activity is associated with mending? Melanie said it.
to make it better.
Yeah, that's to repair.
For me, I think of relationships or like construction.
Okay, you're going in the right direction, especially for the poem, but you're getting very figurative. Let's stay more literal to the meaning of mending. What activity is associated with mending things?
Yeah. I would say a broken heart.
That's it. We're going to talk about the difference between figurative and literal meanings, and you're using mending there in a very figurative way. Melanie said it. What activity is associated with mending?
I thought she said friendships.
No.
Fixing something, doing.
Yeah, we know it's fixing, but it's a special kind of fixing. That's the point.
Repairing.
Repairing what kind of thing? Who mends? I mean, when you mend, you guys don't mend anything. That's why. That's part of the problem. I don't mend anything either. Are you kidding me? Yeah. So sewing. Sewing. When you mend something, it's not any type of repair. What do you do when you mend something?
You're putting
Put it
it
back
together.
together.
Yeah, let's be more clear. Like ostensibly, like some bit of fabric has been torn
Ripped
apart.
apart.
And
Or
you're
you
trying
could
to
say
put them together.
You can say it's rent in two, and when you mend it, you bring them back together. You bring them back together. So we've got a real problem with the title, because the title is what you'd call a paradox or an oxymoron or a contradiction in terms. It contradicts itself in the words that it uses. A wall does what? Yeah, so stitches pieces together. That's to mend, I would think. A wall does what? What's the function of a wall? We already said it. It separates, it divides. But what is mending? Mending is bringing things together. So think of the title.
Oh, so that's how they both coincide with each other.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So the title is not mending the wall. The title could be a description of what the two characters do. And when most students think about this title, they think about you've got two characters on either side of the fence or either side of the wall. What do they spend their time doing in this story? It's a poem, but it's also a short story. What do they do? It's not complicated. Yeah, they get together to fix the wall, AKA they get together to mend the wall, right? That's one way we could use the word, but that's not what the title is. The title is not mending the wall. The title is mending wall. Let me get really, I'm going to get really in the weeds. This will be the only day where we do this kind of stuff, just to like fry your brains a little bit. What part of speech is mending? Noun, adjective, adverb, verb.
It's a verb.
Okay, it's a verb. And it's in what you would call the present participle with the ing ending. So mending means like you're in the process of doing that thing in the moment and it's happening. It's not like I ran yesterday or I mended yesterday. It's happening now, right? So it's a verb, right? Is it being used as a verb in the title?
No.
No, very good. What part of speech is it being used as when you have the title Mending Wall? What wall is what? It's obviously what part of speech?
It's a metaphor.
Oh, no, you're getting ahead of yourself. You're right. You're getting ahead of us, I should say.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You've got a good point. So what part of speech is wall? Noun, verb, adjective, adverb.
Oh, it's a noun.
Okay, yeah, let's be obvious. It's a noun. Mending modifies the verb, right? What kind of wall is this? It is a stone wall, but he doesn't call it a stone wall. He doesn't call it a white wall, a black wall, a gray wall, a tall wall. He calls it a mending wall. How is mending being used? What part of speech is it? Since it's a verb, but it's not being used as a verb. What do you call a word that modifies a noun?
Is it an adjective?
Yeah, it's an adjective. It's being used as an adjective, right? Just like the title could be tall wall or short wall, it's mending wall. And so the problem of this title is that if we take it literally, it doesn't make sense because walls are things that divide, and yet this is a mending wall that brings things together and repairs them, right? So let's think of this. If we just take the dictionary definitions of the word wall and the word mending, we're not going to get the full understanding of this title, right? Because it just doesn't make sense. So there's also something called a contextual meaning. And a contextual meaning just has to do with how a word is used in a specific context, right? And there's a famous philosopher of language in the 20th century. He said the meaning of the words is how they are used. It doesn't matter what, can I cuss? It doesn't matter what the fucking dictionary says. It's how we use the word. And one thing poets and good writers do constantly, and musicians and songwriters, is that they take words and use them in different ways and they make them mean different things, right? So I'll give you a really bad example. I don't know. I have this thing right here, right? Let me tell you, this is not a teacup. This is an X, right? And for the duration of our class, I'm going to call this an X. And every time I say the X thing, I'm referring to this thing, right? So I can change the I can use different words for that thing. And as long as you understand what I'm talking about, it works. I'll give you a better example. I take it everybody is familiar with Michael Jackson, right? We're not like, I know he's been gone for a little
Of
while.
course.
Yes.
So, he has that song Bad, right? Everybody knows that song.
Yes.
Okay, good. I mean, you're Americans. You're supposed to know that song.
I'm bad. I'm bad.
Yeah, I'm bad. Is he saying he means he's a naughty boy? What does he mean by it when he says I'm bad or that's bad? Does it mean the thing is bad?
I don't think so.
Are we sure? I mean, in the 80s, people said, damn, that is bad. What do we mean when we use that word that way?
That
Remember,
is good.
meaning is use. Okay, so Melanie has come to the rescue of everybody. So she says bad means cool. I mean, honestly, we could even say that when Michael Jackson and other people use the word bad, like they actually just mean good in a manner of speaking. Like that thing is cool, or that thing is, it's the opposite of bad. It's like, it's got some kind of worth or value, or it's exciting, whatever it is. So think about that. He's used a word that means almost the opposite of what he's really saying. Maybe it's not perfectly opposite. Maybe he's not quite saying good, but he's saying he's saying something positive, right? I mean, bad is a negative word. It's pejorative, and yet he's using it to say something positive. And that example is a classic example of the concept of the meaning of a word is its use. And when you talk about the meaning of its word related to how it's used by a songwriter or by an author, we're talking about the contextual meaning. Like, what is the meaning of mending wall within the context of this poem, given that if we just look at the dictionary meanings of these two words, this title really doesn't make no sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. I'll give you another example. The money. We really can't appreciate the meaning of that title without considering how it's used in context. If we, for example, looked up the definition of money, would we understand the title of Junot Diaz's story, The Money? Melanie says no.
No.
Okay, why not? Why would we not be able to understand the full or proper meaning of the title, The Money, just by looking up the dictionary definition of the word? What's missing?
It's not saying what money it's referring to.
Yes, that's basically it. Yeah, in a nutshell. And there's details about that too. So it doesn't refer to the context in which Junot Diaz is using that word, right? So it's not just, the title is not just money. The title is not just some money or I don't know, a money. I guess you can't say that. But the title is The Money, definitive article. He's not referring to just the concept of money in general. He's referring to a specific, I don't know, chunk of money that's described in the context of the story. And if we don't understand the meaning of that word within the context of the story, just having the understanding of what money is doesn't help us at all, almost. I mean, a little bit, but not enough. Well, let's answer the question. What is the money that he's talking about in the title? What does the money really mean? What is it really about?
The money that his mom had saved up.
Okay, so number one, he's referring to the physical money that his mother had saved up. But then, of course, that money, is that money just about cold hard cash, or does it have some other meaning beside just cold hard cash that's been saved up? It also refers to the money that's stolen. That's absolutely correct. The physical body of money that's stolen.
The value of it.
Yeah, so what is the value of that money beyond just its economic value?
Could it be the hard work she put into to make
That's
that?
part of it. That's part of it. Melanie says something about remittance money. What the hell's a remittance?
The money that they send to her family, to the family back home.
Back in Dominican. Okay, so the money refers to a wad of cash that she put together with a lot of hard work. That's what it means. But then the meaning of that specific wad of cash has to do with giving it back to where she came from, to her parents. What's the meaning of that money beyond the economic value of it? What is it? What is that money really about? Which is to say, what we're really asking is, what does that title really mean? On one hand, it refers to a specific body of money. On another hand, it refers to, like, kind of, you might say, the sentimental meaning of that cash, that the value of it has some kind of sentimental meaning rather than just economic meaning.
Maybe to show that they can provide or something like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we'll look at it in just a little bit. A sacrifice. I think that's a good direction. And yes, it obviously, it has to do with the relationship with not just the grandparents, but also with the other country that the mother's no longer living in, right? It's a kind of connector to this other world and to her past that she's no longer in. And there's a generational thing going on there, because the young boy who's the center of the story, you don't get the impression he really grew up in Dominican. You get the impression he grew up in New Jersey. Okay, irony. Irony is a really good example of the tension between a lexical and a contextual meaning, because in irony, what I say is the opposite of what I mean, right? What I say is literally the opposite of what I mean. So let's say that it's raining and snowing and sleeting, and I was walking down 23rd Street, or I don't know, walking down somewhere in the Bronx, and the snow like splashes up on me, like the brown water that's floating in the gutter, and the taxi car goes by, and it's just a miserable day. And then I go into work and someone says, "So how's your day going?" And I go, "Yeah, it's really freaking great." Right? And of course, what I actually mean is it sucks, but I'm being ironic. What I mean is literally the opposite of the words that I'm using, or the meaning of the words that I'm using. So irony is like one of these really fascinating examples that illustrates the necessity for interpretation. When that person comes in and says, "Oh yeah, it's a really fucking great day," or pardon my French, Only a fool doesn't realize that that person is not actually having a great day, right? Daniel.
I guess you could say it's similar to like sarcasm.
Yeah, they're
That's what I was
related.
gonna say.
Yeah, they're related. And so, oh, I have a definition of sarcasm somewhere. But irony traditionally, actually for thousands of years, literally it means the opposite. The meaning of what you're trying to communicate is actually opposite the literal meaning of the words, right? So let me go forward here, because I want to kind of get moving on. And I'm going to touch on a couple more things, touch on reading, and then we'll get to the vocabulary. All right, really important in interpretation. The writer implies and the reader infers. The writer implies and the reader infers. What does it mean to imply? What does it mean to imply something? What does it mean to imply something? Anybody? What does
Is
it
it to
mean?
make is it to make an assumption about something?
That's a little more like in making an inference. An inference is a certain kind of assumption.
Oh, okay.
But when you imply, anyone else want to try imply?
I would say like direct the audience to like one way of thinking or one answer.
I think you're getting at it. I think you have the idea. So Melanie is like coming to the, so I think it was Melanie who said her microphone's not working or she can't speak. But so Melanie says this: to imply is to suggest something without outright saying it, without outright saying it. That's a little complicated. Yeah. So it's the difference between being explicit and implicit, right? Implicit is where you get the word imply, right? So when you're explicit, you state your meaning overtly, transparently, with no uncertainty about it. When you imply something, when you're implicit, you just hint at it, you suggest it, you intimate it, you nudge the person you're speaking to, but you don't spell it out with like that plane that goes across the beach that like says the headline. I'll give you a situation where you imply things. I don't know, your best friend gets a new outfit and it really doesn't fit properly or look very good on them. And they say, how does it look on me? Right? And you don't really want to say it doesn't look good on you. You say, have you considered that other outfit lying on your bed?
Do
Right?
you say that the outfit don't match?
Pardon?
Do you say the outfit do not match?
Yeah. Well, whatever it is you come up with. But instead of saying, no, that looks like crap, don't wear it, you try to suggest, you try to imply, right? So in all great works of literature, for various reasons, because great authors, they want you to do the work. They want you to figure it out. There's a kind of whodunit mystery about the meaning of a text, and the author doesn't. The author knows it's boring when they just tell you everything explicitly. They want you to figure things out for yourself and use your own head and put the pieces together yourself. And in many ways, this is not subjective. The author is really, when they imply things, they are really leading you to a certain conclusion that is not random, that is not arbitrary, that is not subjective. There's always openness in a text. There's always an element for disagreement about its meaning on subtle levels, but there's certain things you really can't disagree about. Like, in Mending Wall, there are two guys, they're there fixing a wall. They have different perspectives. They don't exactly get along perfectly. There are things that are just there in the text. Like you can't really disagree about them. Yeah, like a hidden message in the movies. I'll tell you, like Alfred Hitchcock, he would say that the worst film is where two characters stand around explaining the plot to the audience, right? In a good movie or in a good book, the author just suggests what's going on. And a lot of the things you have to figure out for yourself, right? Whenever you watch like a bad sitcom, you get that feeling of two characters sitting around explaining the plot to the audience because they don't give any credit to the audience to be able to figure it out, right? And that's why those kind of many of those shows are so stupid, because they don't treat you with any intelligence, and there's nothing to figure out. It's just all transparent. Okay, so the writer implies and the reader infers. So when the writer implies or suggests, then we try to figure out through inference what is truly and fully being said, right? So an inference is just a logical deduction based on, you take what you're given and you determine a new fact from it. Like if I gave you the series of numbers 1, 2, 3, and then the next, instead of giving you a number, the next one was like a blank, you would all know that the next number is 4, even though it hasn't actually been given you. You saw a logical relationship between the first 3 numbers, and then you could deduce, you could make a logical inference on what the next number would be, right? And we do this all the time without thinking, typically, without thinking. So what I want to do right now is we should just jump into the vocabulary and then do some reading, and then it's almost 9 o'clock, so that means, oh wow. All right. You know what I'm going to do is I want to go through these words really quickly because I've provided you a lot of information and a video on these terms. And I just want to kind of blow through them, and then we'll use them to apply the text. So we've got text and context. The text is just the body of words itself, and the context is the situation within you read it. We have a distinction between form and content. So to analyze something is to break something down into its component parts, right? And you break it down into its component parts in order to understand it. So if you want to really understand how a car works, you can't just stare at the outside and see it move. You'd have to like take it apart, or at least, you know, be aware of all those components inside of it and how they work together to do what the car does, right? There's a computer system, there's a drivetrain, there's gasoline or electric now, and so on and so forth. So analyze is to break something down in order to understand it. So you've got, whenever you have whenever you have a text, you have a distinction. It can be broken down into 2 elements. It's form and its content. It's form and its content. And the form is just the structure, and the content is just the what, the meaning. The form is how something is said, and the content is the what that is being said, right? Okay, so I'm going to move pretty quickly here. These are 2 Greek terms that are connected with literary analysis. So everything you read is either one of 2 things. It's either a version of a mythos, or it's a version of a logos. And a mythos and a logos are 2 types of accounts. And by accounts, I don't mean bank accounts. I mean explanations of things. What do we do when we write? We're always trying to explain the world around us. The theme of this course is frenemies, friendship, human relationships. Everything we're going to read is attempting to give an account or an explanation of human relationships, what they're like and why they are the way they are, right? Some really mysterious questions, right? And there's 2 basic forms that all these explanations come in. And actually, mythos is just the Greek word for myth. And we know myth is a kind of fiction story. And the other word is logos. It means speech and reason, but also a rational account. And we might think of these 2 basic types of explanations of the world. One is fiction, that's myth, and the other is nonfiction, that's logos. It's actually really pretty simple, right? In particular, a myth is a narrative account. A myth is a narrative account that's typically fiction, right? So what is a narrative account? That's just a fancy way of saying it's a story. And it's a story that's not just intended for entertainment purposes, but it's a story that's intended to explain something about the world, right? What people are like, for example. A logos is just a rational explanation of things, right? So things like philosophy, science, history, these are all rational explanations that are bound by reason and evidence. So in our course, we're going to read fiction and nonfiction in looking at the phenomena of friendship. We're going to look at stories that illustrate human relationships. And we're going to look at kind of, you could call them scientific or evidence-based explanations of why human beings are the way they are. So today we have two stories. They're mythoi, they're myths in a sense. And next week we're going to look at Sapiens, which is really a kind of a book dealing with the history or the science of human beings and how our relationships came to be what they are. Okay. The next two Greek words have to do with ways of telling a story. So this deals with mythos alone. It deals with storytelling. Diegesis, I'm not going to read all this stuff now because it's too much. Diegesis is just a fancy word for narration, in which you have a narrator explaining things to other people, to the reader, I should say. And mimesis, the word literally means imitation. It's where we get our word mimic, right? And in this context, mimesis means imitation of dialogue. So here you have characters speaking directly. And so there are three ways of telling a story. You can use narration, you can use dialogue, and you can use the combination of the two that is often called a mixed style. Question, Mending Wall and the Money, which are they? Are they narration? Are they dialogue? Or are they a mixture of the two?
Narration.
Narration, absolutely. And what else?
Mixed.
Is
I
there,
would say
is there
mixture
any-
of the two.
Yeah, so there's some dialogue. It's really crucial. There's not a whole lot, but there is some important dialogue.
So
Let me ask one little question here. Novels and short stories, what style, what form do they normally use, or what style do they normally use? Of these three.
Narration.
And
Dialogue.
yeah, so most novels are a mixture, right? There's
Yeah.
lots of narration, but there's almost always dialogue too. It's a mixed.
Yeah.
Destiny said it, a play would be what?
A dialogue.
Yes, there are rare instances where plays have narrators, but almost always all you have is characters speaking, right? And it's just a different way that the author communicates with the reader. And it's important to just be aware of that distinction. Okay, so we're going to run through these words and we have maybe 15, 20 minutes to talk about the readings. So these are the rest of the terms. Narrative, it's really simple. It's a story. It's a story. And it's important that when you think of a story, it's a bunch of words told about events. It is not the events themselves, right? So if I go out and catch a fish this morning, then I come home, I'm not catching a fish anymore. I already did it. The physical stuff happened this morning. And then I tell a story to my wife. Oh, honey, I caught a fish that was, this big, right? What I'm telling her is just a bunch of words. It's a story, right? I don't know. Think about it like this. Somebody goes to the police and they say, oh, someone did something to me and they should go to jail. The police don't go, oh my God, we better put that person in jail. The first thing they do is, well, you just told us a story. And now we're going to look into the physical facts that may or may not back up the words of your story, right? So a plot is just the series of events themselves, right? Beginning, middle, and end. Setting is the where and the when of a story. But there's something really important, like in high school, you get setting is where and when. But what the setting of a story really is not just a date and a place, but rather it's the way of life of that time and place, right? So if I say 9/11, New York City, I've given you a setting. But when you think of that setting, you don't just think of downtown Manhattan and a date. You think of a whole world that went on that day and the emotions it provoked and the circumstances involved and everything we were told it, was, right? So a setting is like the kind of whole world that you're in, right? Characters, it's the who, it's the people involved. Narrator, if you have narration, diegesis, it's the person telling the story. Narrative voice or perspective, not narrator, but narrative voice, is how the story is told based on who's telling it. In Mending Wall, you've got two characters. Which one of them is the narrator? Which one of them is the narrator? Let me do this. Tell me about the two characters. What are they all about? What's the difference between the two characters?
I believe the difference between the two characters, Frost is more.
Well,
I don't even.
all right.
I'm sorry.
So very good. So Frost is the author, right? And the narrator of the story is not the author. The narrator of the story is one of the characters. Yeah, so Destiny says these two guys are opposites. I totally agree. Could we just flesh out a little more about like what makes them opposite? We'll look at it in just half a second here. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Yeah, so the monies. So here's one important thing. The author and the narrator are not the same. Unless the author explicitly claims to speak in his own voice, the narrator is just as much a character as anybody else in that story. It feels like the author is speaking directly to you, but they're not. Because if they were, it would be called nonfiction. And actually, when you publish books, you publish them under like a legal rubric of fiction versus nonfiction. And as we know, authors like to lie. They lie for a profession. That's what they do. They make shit up. So you never want to assume that the author and the narrator are one and the same. It often feels that way, but it's not the case. Okay, conflict. It's the problem that propels the story forward. It makes for a story. Conflict needs to be resolved. Theme, a distinctive and reoccurring dominant idea. A distinctive and reoccurring dominant idea. The theme is not the main topic of a story. It is a main topic. It's not the main thing. There could be a number of crucial themes. One thing that's important about a theme is the author does not come out and tell you, this is the theme of my story, right? They just depict action, they depict speech, and then you have to figure it out. And then a trope is a figurative or metaphorical use of a word or expression, right? The literal meaning of a word is partly its dictionary definition, but literal meanings are normally tied to like physical reality, right? So a figurative meaning is a more symbolic meaning. So if we think back to that title, Mending Wall, we realize that if we take that title literally, it really doesn't make sense because it's a contradiction in terms. A wall does not mend, a wall divides. So what the heck does it actually mean? We realize very quickly that we have to start thinking about that wall of the title in more symbolic terms. We're no longer simply talking about a physical wall. Okay, so let's do this. Maybe we can go about, can we hang in for like 15 more minutes? Okay, I feel people are like, all right, great. If you guys can hang in, I can go forever, but you guys have lives. I know that. Okay. Who would like to read for us? I need a volunteer to read for us. A victim. Yeah, why not the whole thing, Melanie? It's not that long. I can call on someone.
I read it.
Kelly, thank you.
All the Dominicans I knew those days sent money home. My mother didn't have a regular job besides caring for us 5 kids, so she scrimmed the loot together for whatever came her way. My father was always losing his forklift jobs, so it wasn't like she ever had a steady flow. But my grandparents were alone in Santo Domingo, and those can you say that word?
Remittances.
Remittances beyond material support were a way, I suspect, for mommy to negotiate the distance caused by our diaspora. She chipped dollars off the cash Poppy gave her for our daily expenses, forced our already broke family to live even broker.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That was how she built the nut, maybe $300 that she sent home every 6 months or so.
Okay, great. Okay, keep going. Please read the next paragraph.
Okay. We kids knew where the money was hidden, but we always knew that to touch it would have meant a violent punishment approaching death. I, who could take the change out of my mother's purse without thinking, couldn't have brought myself to even look at that forbidding stash.
Okay, so then the next line is, so what happened? So what happened? In these first 2 paragraphs that Kelly read, has anything happened in the story? Has there really been any event described?
No.
No.
No. I mean, we think of a story as like stuff happens, right? If things don't happen, there's no story. What is the function of these first 2 paragraphs?
To give some context.
Yeah, to provide some context, to provide an introduction,
What's going to be about?
To give us the situation. I mean, we don't fully know what it's going to be about. We just know the situation, right? And so connected with this is the concept of the setting, right? In these first 2 paragraphs, Juno Diaz, or we should just say the narrator, has given us a painting in broad brushstrokes of the setting. And obviously it's not just a place, it's what things are like. It's the kind of life they're leading. It's even kind of who's involved. Like it's that whole context, right? So that's the first thing that's really important. The next thing is we want to figure out what the heck this money is really all about. Because let me tell you, this money is not really about this. It's not really about dollars and cents. It's not about economic value. Exactly. And so we see, it's funny that he titled this story The Money. Because, I mean, this story is about human relationships. It's not about making money. It's not about capitalism. It's not about free markets. It's not about Marxism. I mean, obviously, part of the setting, well, let's put it this way. What kind of environment do they live in? Like what kind of life do they have?
They were struggling.
Yeah, they're struggling. So so money is an issue for them, right? What is the setting? What kind of world are they living in? Yeah, so poor, it's like a borderline. Like, they're not like destitute, right? But they're not doing particularly well. What kind of world are they living in?
I would say a normal world.
What's normal for one person, not necessarily normal for another. Are they living in the suburbs with white picket fences with the Joneses next to them?
I would say my normal world, the world that we live in.
Poverty.
Yeah, I mean, you know, are they like dirt poor? I don't think so, but they don't have resources. You know, they're living kind of hand to mouth. That's definitely true. They're living in an immigrant community, right? And they're somewhere in New Jersey. It's some kind of an urban environment. So when you guys say normal, I mean, it has a lot of features of, you know, like the boroughs of New York City. Good. So that's the setting, right? The setting's not just a place. It's like what that place is like, right? Okay, so the money. You notice in these first two paragraphs, the money is actually referred to many times. Here it's called, you know, in those days, sent money home. Now that's general money, but this is the money. My mother didn't have a regular job, so she scrimped the loot. The loot is the money. What does that mean? She scrimped it together.
She got like the little pieces together.
Yeah, like it was obviously hard to get that big chunk of cash of a few $100 together because that wasn't easy to come by. So she had to like cobble it together, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I was gonna say just, you know, scrape up like whatever she can.
Good, good. So we have script to loot, we have money, and then we have remittances, and then there are also material support. The important thing is these are all synonyms for the money. And each time the author uses a different word. I mean, first of all, why is he using a different word every time to refer to the money? What might be some of the reasons for that?
Can you say that again?
Because it's the important thing of the title, or just referring to the title in general.
Let me repeat. So he uses a bunch of different words, synonyms, and different phrases to refer back to the money, but he doesn't simply use the money over and over again. He uses other words to characterize that money.
Is it
And so the first thing is, I think, Chantel, you're right, that this has to do with referring back to the title and starting to give meaning to that title in a more specific way. Okay, it definitely shows its importance. What else about it? Is the money one thing or is it many things? Does it have one meaning or does it have a series of related meanings?
I would say it's one meaning.
I mean, it is one chunk of money, but I think it's got different, it means one thing in terms of them being not so well off. It means another thing in terms of sending the money back. What exactly is, so notice, it says, and those remittances. What is a remittance?
I don't even know.
The money being sent.
Okay. First thing, remember what we said about being Socratic. When you don't know something, you acknowledge that to yourself and you open up, I'm going to say open up a dictionary. You Google the word on, you know, whatever whatever platform. Anyway, if you don't know a word, remittance is one of the most important words in this text, especially if you want to understand the meaning of the money. What does it mean, a remittance? What does it mean to remit, the verb?
The money that is being sent or something that's been sent.
Yeah, so it literally means to like give back or to send back. So what are they doing? The mother is cobbling together all this money and literally sending the money back to home, kind of, sort of. Let's just go through. There's three generations. There's grandparents, there's parents, and then there's the narrator. What is home for the grandparents?
Back to the homeland, Dominican Republic.
Yeah, because they've been there the whole time, right? They didn't leave. What is home for the narrator?
America.
Jersey.
Yeah, New Jersey. I mean, yes, he's connected with this past, but he's basically of New Jersey. He's not really, I mean, he's Dominican, but he's not, he's New Jersey, right? What about the parents? The middle generation?
No.
Well, they're kind of split, right? They're like, they've got one foot in each world and they're not really in either of them properly, right? So notice what is said here. Beyond material support. What does it mean that the money is material support? Well, it's economic resources so you can get by, right? But it says beyond material wealth support. The money was a way, I suspect, for mommy to negotiate the absence, the distance caused by our diaspora or diaspora. I've never figured out the way that's supposed to be pronounced, but either one works. What is this money really about? Because it ain't about this. And the narrator just said it. It says beyond the economic value of it. It was a way for mommy to do what?
Connect.
Yeah. So what does diaspora mean?
Diversity.
It has it's connected with that, but that's not its primary meaning. What is a diaspora? Okay. A diaspora is a group of people who started out in a common homeland. Like, let's take, for example, Dominican. And then, for whatever reason, they're forced to leave their homeland. And when they leave their homeland, not only are they like exiled or displaced, or you might even use the word like refugees from their home, but when they come to a new place, they don't do it as a group. They get dispersed out like all over the place. And if you think about like the identity of a people is always connected to their homeland. So when they're dispersed out, not only are they displaced from the place that gives them identity, but they can't even bond together in the new places they are because they're not in one place. They're all over the place. So what is this money really about? It's a connection to not just Dominican, but to that identity, right? And it's an identity even that the young kid doesn't really fully appreciate because he's New Jersey, right? Okay. This story is not really about money. I mean, economic status is definitely here. Talk about the friend that has the TVs and then they steal stuff because they want to steal it. But the money is really something that connects. It's like a thread that connects people together. Actually, there's a famous Tolstoy story called The Forged Coupon. And the forged coupon is, it's like something that ends up in all these different people's hands. And it becomes the thread that like connects all these kind of diverse people. It's quite interesting. Anyway, so the money is really an excuse to deal with human relationships, right? And first it starts out with the connection with the grandparents and the parents and the grandparents. But then the main chunk of the story becomes about the friends and they're stealing the money and him wanting it back. Okay. And he's got a lot of different words for those friends. We're not going to read every last thing here because we want to move on to Mending Wall. But what happens in this story going forward?
Long story short, they're not his friends.
Okay, this is one of, we'll come back to that in just a second because that's really huge. That's really huge. And it's evident in the words and the language used to describe them. But what actually happens?
I would say that Diaz got the money back for his mom.
Okay, no. I'm talking about like really on the most obvious level. What happens? The friends do what?
Stole the money.
They steal the money. Eventually, the narrator gets the money back. But what's the other big moment that occurs in this story beyond just money being stolen and getting it back? It's the moment when what happens?
When the mother didn't acknowledge him.
Or I was gonna say something different. Sorry.
That's part of his relationship with his mother is definitely important. But I think the big moment, almost like the climax of this story, is not with the mother.
When he wanted to get back, when he thought about possibly not returning the money to his mother.
That's a very interesting moment because he knows how important this money is, not just in terms of cash, but in terms of sentimental value. And yet he still wants to keep it. That's one of the really interesting moments in the story. Because like he knows better. What happens right here? Why don't we start reading right here? Who was reading? Was it Kelly?
Yeah, I was reading.
Yeah, could you start from no one took the robbery as hard as my mom?
No one took the robbery as hard as my mom, though. She cursed the neighborhood. She cursed the country. She cursed my father. And of course, she cursed us kids. Swore that we had run our gums to our idiot friends and they had done it.
What does she mean there? Run our gums to our idiot friends and they had done it. What is the mother? What is the mother? What does the mother assume specifically? Can we spell it out? Here is an instance where something is suggested or implied, but it's not totally stated.
That the son said something to his friends.
What specifically?
Talked about the money.
Yes, let's be clear. The mother is suggesting that the kids, because the money's so cool to these young kids, they talked about the money, the friends found out, and then the friends decided to steal it. So the mother's very sharp, right? She's nobody's fool. She knows what happened, even though she doesn't have proof of what happened, right? Okay, then the next paragraph. You want to keep going, Kelly?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
And this is where the tale should end, right? Wasn't as if there was going to be any CSI style investigation or anything, except that a couple of days later, I was moaning about the robbery to these guys I was hanging with at that time, and they were cursing sympathetically, and out of nowhere, it struck me. You know, when you get one of those moments of mental clarity, when the
nictitating membrane.
Nictitating membrane obscuring the world suddenly lifts. That's what happened. I realized that these two dopes I call friends had done it. They were shaking their heads, mouthing all the right words, but I could see the way they looked at each other. The
Raskolnikov glances.
I knew.
Okay, great. I knew. He went from a state of ignorance to a state of understanding. And I would argue, I mean, we can dispute about it, but I would argue that this is like the moment of the whole story.
Okay.
And it's not exactly about the money per se. It's about his realization about these people he called friends. And he ain't calling them friends anymore. He's calling them two dopes. And the mother called them idiot friends, which that's not really, doesn't sound really like a friend. What is he talking about here? He says, I was moaning about the robbery. So he was sad about it happened. He was whining about it, whatever. And he did it to these guys I was hanging out with at the time, and they were cursing sympathetically. What does that mean? They were cursing sympathetically.
Does it mean like they were acting like they cared about what had happened?
Yeah, they were acting like they felt so sorry and bad about what happened. But of course, they were the guys who did it. So they had to pretend. I don't know. You can imagine, like, I'll cuss again. Oh, shit, man. They took your money. That's awful. Then who would do that? Right. And of course, they didn't sound right when they did. They didn't sound very convincing when they were doing this. Right. And so he has this moment of mental clarity. So he has this kind of like enlightenment moment. I don't know, like the Buddha or something where, you know, the clouds part and he sees things clearly for the first time. And does anyone know what a nictitating membrane is? Because before I looked it up, I certainly didn't.
No.
So a nictitating membrane is some kind of extra eyelid on certain animals like frogs. So basically, I don't know if you've heard the expression like this, the scales fall from your eyes and you see clearly. Like if you know the story of Adam and Eve, when they picked the fruit, it's like it says their eyes opened and they realized they were naked. And of course, this is a metaphor because it's not like this character is literally opening his eyes. It's his mind's eye, right? He's realizing something, right? And there's a visual metaphor of understanding through seeing. So when we understand something, we say, I see it, you know, I get it. We use all these metaphors for thinking all the time. And what did he really see for the first time?
I think he realized.
Oh, it's not tricky. What did he see?
Well,
The obvious that they stole the money.
Yeah, number one, that they stole the money. So here's the big thing. All along after the robbery, he knew there were crooks, right? He knew there were people who took it. And he also knew he had these friends. But what he didn't realize was that the so-called crooks and the so-called friends were the same people, right? So this is this moment where he discovers that they're the same. That happens in a tragedy, Greek tragedy, all the time. It's like, you know, there's person X and you know there's person Y. And then the shocking moment is when you realize it's the same person and you didn't realize it was the same person. Like, for example, Oedipus sleeping with his mother, right? He knew he had a mother and he knew he had a wife. He just didn't realize they were the same person, right?
my God.
Yeah, well, that's why it's Oedipus, right? Because it's shocking. What else did he realize? That these people what?
Weren't his real friends?
Yes. Boy, you know, some students don't always get that. He is calling them friends because that's what we call them. But that doesn't always, just because we use that word doesn't mean that the people we're talking about always really live up to that phenomenon, right? So when we talk about a friend, I mean, we really mean like a real friend. And what he discovered in getting to know them, because he didn't know them that well, maybe, is he realized they weren't really friends at all, despite he had called them that and understood them as that, as friends for all the time. So it's a difference here between appearance and reality. They appeared to be his friends, but time revealed that in fact they were not really his friends. Why did he want to be friends with these people? Why did he hang out with these people? Why did he consider them friends? A story doesn't clarify all these details, but it gives you an idea. Why was he friends with these people? Given that they weren't perfect friends, or maybe they weren't really friends at all.
Maybe because they lived in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, you want to explain that just a little bit more? Why does that matter? Could he be friends with everybody or anybody he wanted?
I believe so.
You're able to be friends with anybody and everybody you want? What limits everybody in terms of who they can date and who they can be friends with? Who they
Is
can
it
marry?
age?
Well, yeah, that matters. That's,
Could it be economic status?
yeah, I mean, that's more generally. So Melanie says the circumstances, why are they friends? Because of the circumstances in which they live. Who are you going to be friends with? Are you going to be friends with someone across the country who you can't meet?
No.
Are you going to marry someone across the world who you can't meet? Or you can only meet online? No, at least I hope not. Right?
Because
I mean, you can only be with and be friends with the people you actually have physical access to.
Yeah.
So there's your neighborhood, there's school, I don't know, there's your church or mosque. And you know, that's kind of it. Like this is a really important lesson about friends and relationships. You can only have relationships with people you have access to. And because our lives have boundaries and limitations, You can only those are the only people you have. I mean, yes, there's the internet, and yes, you can go out and actively try to meet people, but there's a kind of scarcity. There's a kind of limitation. He's friends with, let me read into it just a little. He's friends with them because these are the kids that are there to be friends with. And of course, he wants to try to be friends with them because he wants friends. He wants to hang out with people rather than not hang out with nobody. So what does he do? He takes the kind of second best of trying to be friends with kids. He may have suspected we're not going to be perfect friends, right? Well, let me ask this. Is this not a problem for all our relationships? Like, don't we want real friends? But then the problem is, where are they? How many real friends can you have? Like, it's hard. It's a child. Life presents challenges to having, people you can trust, for example. Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Okay.
Agree.
So this issue is a real problem. Like, when you're a teenager, I don't know, some of you, most of you, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to marry the perfect person. It's going to be like cosmic harmony or something like that. And then you get out in the real world and you go, this is what I've got to choose from. Like, whoa, boy, that's a little different than what I conceived in my head. Because what was in my head was like utopia, right? And there ain't no utopia out there. I mean, there are good people, don't get me wrong, but there are limits. Okay, so let's go about 5-10 more minutes and we'll call it a night because we've gone a long time here and everybody's been really patient and great. And next class, we will not go quite this long, but we had kind of a lot of stuff to cover today. Okay, so there's a lot of things we could talk about with this poem, but what I want to focus on are just two things. Number one, what are these characters like? What is their position? What is like their point of view? And obviously we know that they're different. They're like in conflict with one another. Then the other thing we want to talk about is like, what does this wall really mean? What is this wall really about? And of course, like, what does it mean when it says good fences make good neighbors? Because he says it twice and that makes it really significant. Okay. Who would like to read for us? Someone other than Kelly, because she did a nice job reading before. Could I have another volunteer?
I can read.
Melanie, go for it.
Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on stone. But they would have the rabbit out of hiding, to please the yelping dogs, the gaps I mean. No one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line, and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game. One on a side, it comes to little more. He is all pine and I am apple orchard.
Yep.
My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense, something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moved in darkness, as it seemed to me, not of woods only and the shades of trees. He will not go beyond, he will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors.
Okay, great. Perfect. We've got two characters. They're on each side of the wall. They're getting together to do what?
Put up a wall.
Not quite put up it. I mean, basically, but specifically what? Yeah, fix the wall. What time of year are they fixing the wall?
In spring.
Yeah, and why is that? The cycles of nature are invoked here, and that's important. What happens during the winter? The wall gets
Cold?
partly. What happens to it when it gets cold and the groundswell, the frozen groundswell under it? Yeah, Melanie's got it.
The tail comes up.
The wall deteriorates during the winter months for various different reasons, and part of that has to do with because it's winter. Hunters, the frozen groundswell under it, it makes the thing fall apart, deteriorate. And they come out in the spring. Why do they come out in the spring?
Because
Simple.
the weather is better.
Yeah, it's very simple. The weather is pleasant and the destructive weather that damages the wall is over and it's comfortable to come out. What else is spring associated with? Apart from nice weather. I mean, it's connected to nice weather. What happens in the spring?
The flowers bloom.
Yeah. You bunch of city slickers, right? Everything that's desolate and dead, let's just say it gets reborn. It's like a rebirth of everything. It comes alive again. What's one of the things that comes alive again in the spring? Not just the trees. What else is kind of regenerated in the spring in this story? Beside plants and animals. They're what?
Their habitat?
No, I'm not talking about plants and animals anymore. I'm talking about the people. What else is kind of regenerated or rejuvenated or reborn even?
Right. Yeah.
They're what?
Rebuilding a wall.
And what do these two guys establish when they rebuild the wall?
Their friendship.
Well, that's an interesting word. Is it a friendship? We can think, let's just say their relationship is reborn again. Because you get this impression that they've kind of gone in during the winter, they're away from each other. And it's this ritual of rebuilding the wall that inspires them to come in contact with one another. It's interesting. They've got very different points of view. Do they really get along? Yes and no. But the wall is the thing that kind of forces them to interact, right? They're kind of compelled and they have to work with each other
to build this wall, right?
Yeah. And so they might not otherwise interact if they didn't have this thing that they had responsibility together to maintain. What are their two basic points of view? How would you distinguish these two characters? I mean, it's very schematic here. You don't get like a whole lot of, there is a general mutual respect up to a point. They don't agree with each other. That's obvious, but they're willing to kind of, what are they doing beside just building a wall while they're working? What are they doing also? Or fixing the wall or mending the wall? What are they doing while they mend the wall?
They're communicating, talking.
Yes. How do you know that?
Because in some part of the poem, he's like saying that I don't remember, can't go to the neighbor's side.
And then he said, I let my neighbor know beyond the hill.
Yeah. You have dialogue in quotation marks.
Mhm.
That means these characters are not just speaking to you, the reader, they're speaking to each other.
Mhm.
Now notice it's a poem, so that the way the dialogue is presented is not as coherent as if it were like a short story. It would be a little more clear that they're carrying on a conversation, but I think he gives you enough dialogue in quotation marks to suggest that there's an extended conversation going on while they fix the wall, and you're not privy to like every last detail of it, but you get a little taste of it. You know, why do good fences make good neighbors? And the other neighbor just responds with, good fences make good neighbors. That's it. There's nothing else to it. Okay. So about 5 more minutes here. There's some key things. What are the 2 points of views of these characters? What's the point of view of the narrator? What's his personality? What's his outlook? What's his understanding of things? What's their main dispute? So Melanie, everything you're saying is like right on point. And Destiny, you're right on point. The narrator is for or against the wall? He's against it, right? Like, this is Donald Trump's wall. Like, let's tear down that wall. Does the narrator want the wall removed? Is he like really protesting against it? What's his position exactly relative to the wall? If we could speak up a little bit instead of just using chat, and we're almost done here.
I would say he is against it, but he also respects it enough to not willingly himself break it down.
Okay, that's good. What does he do? He does what? He wants to know what?
I would say he tries to talk to the other neighbor, like to
Definitely.
convince him.
What is he asking the other neighbor? What does he talk about?
The wall.
What specifically about it?
He tries to give reasons why they shouldn't have the
Yes.
wall.
So let's be clear. The one neighbor is not quite fully against the wall, but he doesn't like the wall. He doesn't like the idea of the wall, but he's willing to entertain explanations as to why it's necessary. The wall is this boundary between human beings. We don't like to feel that there needs to be boundaries between human beings. We like to feel intimacy between human beings. We'd like to have no bound. So clearly this wall is becoming more metaphorical or more symbolic here, right? It's not just a physical boundary that separates properties. It's a kind of psychological boundary that separates the two characters from maybe a greater intimacy. And of course, that boundary is really appropriate because on one side you have one point of view that's one way, and on the other side of that wall, you have another point of view. So that boundary, that wall does not just reflect two different properties, right? It divides two different points of view, and not just two different points of view on the wall, but two different points of view on human beings and human nature. I'll come to that in a second. So the one neighbor, he asks questions. He doesn't like the wall because he doesn't see quite why it's necessary, but he's open to explanations and reasons and evidence. Is the other guy interested in reasons and evidence? The other guy obviously thinks the wall is good.
I say no because I think he's just following what his father used to say before.
Okay, good. Good. So number one, the neighbor does not He likes the wall. And when he's asked why he likes the wall, he says, good fences make good neighbors. But then he's asked, please tell me what you mean by good fences make good neighbors. Why do they make good neighbors? And the narrator says that the other man does not go behind his father's saying. What does that mean? So that's like a kind of metaphorical, figurative use of language. What does it mean that he doesn't go behind his father's saying?
The tradition.
Okay, we'll come to the tradition in just a second, because you're absolutely right on that. So one character is less traditional. He's questioning tradition. He wants their life to be based on reasons, evidence, and explanations. The other character lives life according to the traditions, and in this case, the traditions of his father. The Latin root of the word tradition is the verb traditio, and it literally means to hand down from one generation to the next. So what is a tradition? It's a way of life and a way of thinking handed down from father to son, to use this context. What does it mean that he doesn't go behind? Yes, the saying is handed down by his father to him. But what does it mean that he doesn't go behind his father's saying? His father's saying is good fences make good neighbors. It's not his own. It's not original. And tradition's not supposed to be original, right? What does it mean he doesn't go behind his father's saying? Somebody kind of said it earlier.
Won't go against it.
That's part of it, but it means something else. Let me ask this.
He's old-fashioned?
He is. He does. So what's one of the rules of tradition? It is bad to break tradition. Therefore, it is good to follow tradition. And being in a traditional society or traditional person is what is old. You follow the dictum of what is old is good, because what is old has been done for a long time, and you show respect for it and you don't question it, because that's what you're supposed to do. The other character questions things. He wants things brought before his own reason and judgment, right? He's not going to accept it just on tradition. He needs an explanation. Tradition says, this is what you're going to do. Don't think about it. It's good because I said so, essentially. Well, there's another reason why traditions might be good. We'll have to get to that in just a second. Okay. Good fences does make good neighbors. Does the other character understand what that means? Good fences make good neighbors. He says it twice. Does he know what it means?
No.
I don't think he does.
Do we know what it means?
In a figurative sense, I think we do.
Okay, we'll come back to it. For the narrator to say that he doesn't go behind his father's saying, I think two things. He doesn't question it, but he also doesn't really fully know what it means, or he doesn't know the reasoning behind the statement. He just accepts the statement at face value, because that's what, a simplistic vision of tradition is. Think about the Bible. You're supposed to have fear and faith in the Lord and follow the Lord's commandments obediently without question. You don't ask God why he gave you that prohibition. You just follow it. You don't try to discern whether that prohibition is reasonable. You just follow it because that's the right thing to do. Otherwise, God punishes you, and so on and so forth. Right? Okay. Let me go back just a second. First line of the poem. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. What's the problem? Something is a pronoun, and we don't know what it refers to.
I would say social norms, or like tradition or culture.
Well, the other guy, his tradition likes the wall.
Yes, that's true.
So the something is normally like normally you have an antecedent, like a noun that comes before the pronoun. Like Jeffrey got up this morning, period. He went and ate breakfast. You know that the he refers to Jeffrey because it's already been stated prior. Here we have, he is the pronoun, right? Something is a pronoun, but we're not told what it refers to.
So it
At
would
least not before it. We're told afterward.
be
What is the something doesn't love the wall? Something destroys the wall. What is it?
the new way of thinking?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Regular
Look at
way
it.
of
Look in the first 5 lines. What is the something that destroys the wall?
The swell that's under it.
Which is what? I agree.
Ice.
Pardon?
Oh, I said ice.
Yeah.
And then
So
said
winter, weather. What's the general thing that's
Mm.
disrupting the wall?
The cold.
Yeah,
You said
even more
the weather
generally,
in general.
the
The
forces of what?
rain.
The
Just the
forces of
different
what?
weathers.
The forces of what?
Nature.
Yes. I mean, weather, season, you're all right. But the big thing is nature. What does nature do to all man-made structures and all man-made things of any kind? If we don't rebuild them constantly, if we don't mend
Kill
them
them.
constantly.
Kill them.
Yeah.
It dies.
Yeah, they disintegrate, right? There's a famous artwork called Spiral Jetty by this guy, Robert Smithson, where he like built this spiral rock formation in the water. And the whole idea was instead of fixing it, well, of course, well, I'll leave it the way it was supposed to be. It was in the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And what was supposed to happen is over time, the forces of nature were literally just going to disrupt the artwork and kind of disintegrate it, right? And that was part of the idea of the artwork. So anything that's made by human beings, it comes into existence, and if it's not maintained, it goes out of existence, right? That's important, both to the physical wall, but also the symbolic wall that they're maintaining or doing maintenance on when they come out in the spring.
Right, and that's why they continue to meet up so that they can keep.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So what we have to really get at now is the real symbolic meaning of the wall, rather than, because it's not just a physical wall, it's something beyond that. But 35, the narrator says it again, something there is that doesn't love a wall. Well, by line 35, what has the narrator acknowledged about the wall relative to him? Does he like the wall?
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, yeah, the answer is no. He has a natural aversion to it. So the second time that something there is that doesn't love a wall is said, I think it's quite likely that the something this time is not the forces of nature.
It's him.
And I think we could say it's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
Because these characters, they're like kind of generic, right? The setting is rather generic. It's hard to tell what there's very little to give you cues. So the first time is nature, the second is human nature. So human nature doesn't like walls. We might put it this way, it doesn't like boundaries. It doesn't like boundaries on our conduct. Why? Because we want to do what we damn well want to do, right? We have an impulse to do something, we want to do it. And on the other hand, we don't like the idea of having boundaries between human beings because we want to believe that human beings can connect and be intimate and that they don't need these boundaries. They don't need jail cells, for example. So now we have to come to this thing. Good fences make good neighbors. What the heck does that mean? Good fences make good neighbors. How does a fence make a neighbor good? Or how does a boundary make a neighbor good?
I think that it could create limits between each other.
Create what?
Limits.
Ah, very good. So a boundary is a type of a limit. How do limits make us good? Think about, a neighbor is this wonderfully ambiguous thing. A neighbor is someone who you live near, but it certainly doesn't mean you're friendly with them. It could mean you have a friendly relationship, but one of the problems with neighbors is you're very close to people who are often real jerks. I was in court a couple weeks ago, and there was a story. It wasn't a story. It was like a court hearing of a woman who had lived in the same house for like 40 years. And she had a neighbor who was a total jackass. And she was in court because she had problems with what he was doing. And they did not get along. And they were having big conflict, enough to send them to court. Right? So neighbors are not necessarily friends or enemies. It's like they're just someone who you're next to, and they could be either. And if you don't like them, it's a big problem because you're right next to them, right? So how do boundaries or limits on people's behavior make them good?
I would say,
Because if you have limits and boundaries, then you know how far to go with a person.
You what?
If you have limits and boundaries with someone, you'll know how far to go with that person. You'll know, what to say, or what triggers that person, or
Okay. I think you're in the right ballpark. I think we can put it a little more simply. How do boundaries on people make them good? This is a funny way of thinking about what it means to be a good person. When you have limits put on your conduct that prevent you from doing bad things, you're a good person.
does it have anything to do with forgiveness?
It might. This is a little less sentimental here and a little less psychological. What are the boundaries in society that prevent people from doing bad things to other people? Not complete prevention, but a high degree of prevention.
The law?
Yes. Look, because we want to like move on with our lives here and call it a night. I think what Robert Frost is really talking about here with this wall is not a physical boundary at all. I mean, the physical boundary is a point of departure, but what I think he's really talking about is codes of conduct, moral principles, and ultimately things like laws that prevent us from harming each other in various ways, right? This is very interesting. So if we have boundaries on our conduct, we're going to be good to each other,
Right.
because we're going to be restricted from being naughty, right? And so that's what makes us, quote, good. Now, the problem is, and this is the problem for the narrator. So the neighbor doesn't really fully understand the implications of what he's saying, of how boundaries make people good by regulating their conduct, right? But the problem for the narrator is, well, let's put it this way. If you believe people need things like laws, what are you saying about human beings? What are you saying? What is the commentary about human beings and their nature by the very existence of laws? What is a law? A law says, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not murder. And then connected with that is like a physical consequence if you break the law. You get punished, you get thrown in jail. What does it say about human beings that they need laws? What, the very existence.
Self-control?
What's that?
Self-control, like not having self-control.
Okay, number one, the existence of external laws to restrain people indicates that people do not have the total ability to restrain or to control or to govern themselves. They don't just put the boundaries on themselves. They need something outside of them, like a wall or a law or the police force.
So was that going in the right direction?
To keep them doing the right thing and, well, basically not harming each other, right? So what does that say about human nature? It says intrinsically that we have desires that, if acted upon, would harm other people. And we would really want to act them out if it weren't for the external boundaries put on us.
The laws. Okay.
Right? Think about it. We all want to believe that we're good simply because we're good people, quote unquote. We want to believe that when we do the right thing, it's simply because we restrain ourselves rather than anything external restraining us.
Right, because if there were no laws, then everybody be out acting like, crazy.
Yeah.
But because there's laws, there's those boundaries right there. They know it's a limit. You could get crazy, but you can't.
So you don't want to defund the police, is what you're saying. I mean, I hear Mayor Adams talking about eating vegetarian diets all the time. I don't know that that's the biggest concern we have. No more meat. That's not for me, I can tell you that. So the existence of laws is an indictment against human nature. It says we have the impetus, the desire to do mean things to other people. Now, sometimes we don't conceive it as doing mean things to other people. Sometimes we just want something, and in the process of wanting it, we harm someone else, even if it's just hurting their feelings, let's say, right? But it raises a big question of why people are good. Are they good just because they're good, or are they good because society has good boundaries to keep people in their place? I mean, I don't know what everybody's politics are, and everybody's different, but when you look at around a lot of the cities in the United States over the last 5-10 years, like there's been all kinds of mayhem going on. And a big reason that mayhem went on is because the proper boundaries weren't in place to prevent people from doing it. And the people who did the naughty stuff knew that the laws weren't being enforced. So I don't want to get in like on a soapbox about this, but just to illustrate the point here, because it's a tricky issue. And obviously there's like problems with the criminal justice system. Nobody's going to deny that. But it's interesting. In all societies, the law differs from one society to the next. This is one thing that makes societies different. What do laws have to do with? They have to do with how our society is going to live, like how we understand our life. Since we think of ourselves in this way, we have these laws. And every society has a different identity and and therefore a different understanding of what they consider right and wrong, right? But the funny thing is there is no human society that doesn't have laws. That every human society has recognized the need for good fences, right? But what's the problem? Why is it that human nature doesn't love a wall? I mean, do we really think people are bad? Do we really think people need boundaries?
Yes.
Okay. Do we want to have to acknowledge that people are naughty?
Yes.
I mean, do we like acknowledging that?
No.
No, because number one, we want to think well about other people. And also if we say we need walls and boundaries, we're kind of like indicting ourselves too, right? We're kind of like, well, that's me.
You're not
too.
giving a person a chance, the opportunity to show you that
Yeah,
they're a person.
and we not. I think what the narrator is kind of getting at is like he wants to have an optimistic view of human beings. He doesn't want to believe. And look, nobody wants to believe that we need things like prisons and the death sentence, and okay, these things are horrible. But then when you think about it, if you think about the alternative, well, what does the alternative look like without laws, without police, without even like moral codes of conduct? So there's religion, there's government, there's all kinds of institutions in our society that are like the things that need to be maintained to maintain like civility, right? What does the world look like without all those institutions?
Chaos.
Yeah. So, I mean, is anyone going to disagree with that? That like we have something that's going to look like anarchy or chaos, and it's going to be a free for all, right? Okay. So in one sense, all these boundaries divide us by telling us we can't do this and can't do that, and restricts our conduct. But what do these rules actually allow for? They actually allow us to engage in a civil way with one another, in a respectful way. When we know that the rules are in place and that they're going to be enforced, it actually allows us to be civilized and humane with each other. So there's something really funny here about the way in which this wall between the characters divides them, but it also brings them together. In the same way that rules in society kind of divide us and keep us in our boxes, but by the same token, by keeping us in our box, they actually allow us to coexist with one another in a higher form other than just like anarchy, right? So let's finish with this. Think about the title here. The title is Mending Wall. It's not mending the wall. It's literally a wall that mends, right? So what does this wall in the story mend? What does it help mend? What does
To
it
keep
help?
the peace.
That's part of it. What else does it do?
I would say protect.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And we could even say it mends their relationship. It's
mhm.
the thing that protects them from each other, but ironically, it's also the thing that brings them together in like kind of common cause. Because the wall, I mean, so the problem, the problem with the neighbor, he's actually kind of right, but the point is he doesn't understand how he's right. And that matters too, right? He's just going off what his daddy says. So, I mean, if you think about the function of all the rules in society, they divide us, but they actually, by dividing us and restricting our conduct, they actually allow us to come together in a civilized way. It's like, it's quite amazing actually when you think about it. Because of course, when you think of the alternative is like anarchy and chaos and like, I'm going to bonk you on the head, and because I can get away with it. And this thing of good fences make good neighbors, it raises a very disturbing question. It raises the question of, if we didn't have those boundaries, wouldn't we all be bonking each other on the head, even those people who think they're so good, right? Like maybe what really makes someone good is not that they have like some magical intrinsic goodness, but just that there are boundaries there that they don't feel like getting punished over. It's like, why does a kid stop doing the wrong thing? It's not that they don't want to keep doing that thing. It's that they don't want to suffer the punishment that they've come to, whatever it is. I don't know, something gets taken from them or they get time out or, whatever it is. We don't want to believe that human beings are really like that or capable of that, or that's the only reason why they're good. Okay. So these themes that we're talking about here, they're going to come up over and over again in this course. Particularly when we get to Thomas Hobbes, he's going to talk about a society in which basically like there are no boundaries, there's no moral code, and everybody just can do whatever they want to everybody else. And he tries to explain why the people act the way they do, like what motivates people to harm other people, what are the root causes of it, and also how might you prevent it, like what is the rationale by which you're not going to have that. So this gets at this frenemies issue, right? So like on one hand, you've got these two conflictual parties, they don't agree with each other, and they're in a verbal conflict, but you'd also notice they're not in a physical conflict. They carry on their disagreement in a distinctly human way through a verbal disagreement rather than a physical altercation. Okay. We should get going. Thoughts, questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question about the quiz that we have to do.
Yeah, go for it.
It's due Sunday or?
I'm going to tell you tomorrow when it's going to be due and when it's posted.
Okay.
It will be next week. Because I'm going to give you time to like get prepared for it. It won't be hard.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you guys for hanging in there. We will not go this long going forward, but we had some important stuff to cover tonight, and I wanted it all to be clear. So everybody have a lovely night. Have a great week, great weekend, and we'll see each other next Wednesday.
Night, Professor.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Good night, Professor.
Good night. Take care.